Today I'm talking to Trish Nichol. Hello. How are you?
Hello. Hey.
There's lots of books behind you. That's amazing.
I do like books.
Yes,
There's
I'm sure we'll
over
get
there.
onto it. Yeah, there's some on the other wall. Yeah. So, traditional first question. What do you do?
Oh, it depends on the day, really. I write and I fix things, I think is how it could be best summed up in general, if you want to generalize. Yeah, I guess it depends on the context. What do I do with what?
Well, you can answer this in any way you want. It's a bit of a trick question, actually.
It's a bit of a trick question. Well, I mean, I know that when you meet people in polite society, the social contract dictates when someone says, what do you do? They mean, what do you do for money? But that's never really had any bearing on what I do, which is probably why I've never been filthy rich. But yeah, I do all sorts of things.
Cool.
And it's always fairly good.
So you're quite creative, I know that. So let's go back to the beginning. Have you always been creative? I mean, that's a stupid question, but I'll just open it up.
Well, I don't know that it's a stupid question because I never really thought of myself as creative. It's kind of one of those things like when you're in it, whether it's creativity or depression or the midst of a job or anything like that, like you don't really see out of it. You're just kind of in it. You're just kind of doing it. So that was the lovely thing about I was never really encouraged, but I was never discouraged. So I was able to explore and determine that writing was my happy place. So I've always written. I've always been, that old as soon as I could hold a pen kind of thing. Mom was an avid reader and instilled that in us. Dad liked his stories too, but the cinema was his thing. He read books too, but Mom was like, come home from the library with stacks. And so there was always books around. And that was 2 weeks worth of, until the next trip. And she made us get our own library cards so that our stacks wouldn't infringe on the amount that she was able to get. So it was always a thing. Always a bit weird. I don't know where that started. I do remember a very specific point being like 5 in a bookstore and a woman saying I was a very precocious child. And I was like, what does that mean? And my mom told me, and I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And so I decided I was intentionally going to be a precocious child. And so, yeah, it was just like, I realized it was more fun being weird than it was being normal. And normal was so subjective. And there was a character in a book that I read. I read this book a million times. Like I would take it back to the library and immediately get it out again. I loved this book so much. And it was about a girl going to stay with her rich aunt who lived in New York City. And she smoked long pink cigars and had a pet jaguar. And her dad referred to her as kind of crazy. And somebody said, no. When you're rich, you're eccentric. When you're poor, you're crazy. So I decided I wanted to grow up to be eccentric.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Because I've heard that phrase as well. Because obviously, the English eccentric is a thing.
Oh yeah.
So we live with obviously they are wealthy people, otherwise they'd just be mad, as you say, you know.
Yeah, and you can get away with so much weirdness. You can get away with so much in general, but you can get away with so much, odd behavior, which doesn't fit within the social confines of normal. And it's just kind of, it's charming.
Do you think, here's a point, because I've been sort of very interested in this idea of stories being how we map the world, and it literally is how we think. So in other words, sort of the stories and the desire for stories actually is a projection of how we think, if you like, right? How much would you say that reading a lot as a child expands your awareness of the world, but I'm trying to find the right words. I won't say it makes you precocious, but in a way it sort of does, if you see what I mean. It's not like you're fixed to one line of thinking, which is what obviously the education system tends to do. You don't know anything until somebody tells you that you should know that thing. Do you think that's a point, that because you were experiencing your mother reading a lot and you were encouraged to read a lot, that makes you different and eccentric? Do you say that?
I think it certainly broadens what's possible. It even, to an extent, I would say, broadens what's plausible.
That's good.
Yeah, because there was no doubt in my mind that the possibility of a wardrobe being a gateway to a completely other world was feasible. It was, it might not be necessarily logical given physical constructs of, the worlds we live in, but just the fact that there was a possibility that it could be allowed me to carry around these seeds of creativity, I guess, is the easiest way to explain that. Because that's the thing, someone's already gone to Narnia, someone's already gone to Earthsea, somebody's already gone to all of these places. So there's this lovely grand possibility that exists that I could find places that didn't exist before. And which means that I could be different people than I was before, that I wasn't necessarily limited to being who the world saw me as being, or even how I saw myself as being. And I think that's probably the greatest thing that stories can do, is because the character arc comes from someone being tested, someone being put through a scenario that they might not have experienced had they taken the left fork versus the right. And I remember a long time ago, somebody explaining to the multiverse to me in the simplest of terms is every decision you've ever made resulted in a branching, and somewhere out there is the other yous who made the other decisions. And it's funny because I never actually wanted to go and meet them. I was like, oh, great. I hope they're having lovely time over there. But just the fact that just because I'd made a decision didn't mean that the other road hadn't been taken. It made me sad to consider that of the opportunity lost, not necessarily by me, but just in general. But yeah, I think that being given a story, being given a narrative at such a young age, this is who you are, this is who you're going to be, this is what you're going to do. It definitely narrows kids in And so having access to all of these different places through books, through story, whatever, it casts off those fetters. It doesn't interfere with the growth as a person. I think the more stories you're allowed to access.
And also the thing is, you know, you're talking about the wardrobe, but of course, in a strange sort of way, because obviously language is metaphorical anyway. But of course, it does actually enable you to, enter another world, because what's in the wardrobe? You know, if you put on different clothes, people think you're a different person. So we're back to the thing: if you dress in a particular way, and people will either notice you or don't notice you, depending on how you're dressed. So you sort of enter another world in the viewpoint of other people. You know, if you walk into a place and you've got a fur coat on, going back to the Narnia perspective, you know, you might be considered just eccentric instead of mad. So I was just back into the thing. So you were precocious at 5. so
Nothing has changed.
So what's school like then,
School was really easy up to a point, because I loved puzzles. I loved reading. I loved, like, all through elementary school. It was just, I think at one point they wanted to elevate me a grade, but my mom said, no, I want her to have friends and be with kids her own age and stuff like that. They were giving me work I was often in split classes. So if I was in grade 3, they would give me grade 4 math just to test me and stuff like that. So yeah, they were one of those, it was one of those scenarios where they were like, oh, Trish is a gifted child and she's going to be capable of so much. And that's such a terrible thing to do to kids. Yes, it's that narrowing. It's that, we have expectations of what you're going to be and what you're, just let them be kids and let them find out. I thought I wanted to be a marine biologist at one point, but it turns out I just wanted to be a mermaid. I just wanted to go swimming in the ocean.
Easy mistake to make.
Right. And when I was about 8, I started devouring ghost stories. I wanted to be a parapsychologist. I wanted to hunt ghosts so much. Oh my gosh. I wrote all kinds of really, really terrible ghost stories. Like they were so bad. So the early years, and there was, growing up in elementary school, there's, the core group of friends who were all together. And then when I was 13, high school, it all just went so sideways. Because 13, 14, you're kind of becoming aware of how much space you take up in the world. And high school was really where they started to really narrow things. And there was more emphasis on regurgitation of information that they were feeding us. And it was information that I really struggled to find relevant. And I was never taught, I've heard of friends who went to school and home economics, they taught them economics as well as home. So they came out of school with a sense of how the world works and everything, but they didn't do that at my school. They taught you how to burn an omelet and sew a really terrible apron kind of thing. There wasn't a lot of emphasis on life skills. And I saw time and again how people who struggled were not helped. And that didn't sit well with me. When I think it was grade 10, there was this guy who sat next to me in math class. And when I was in grade 8, I was in all honors classes. And when I was in grade 9, I was in half honors classes. And when I was in grade 10, I was in 1 honors class. And they were like, oh, she's, getting stupider. And it was I don't know if I would have called it stupidity. I would have called it disillusioned and bored. A lot of that. But there was this really sweet guy who sat next to me in math class who really struggled. And the teacher was hard on him because every failure in his class meant a strike against him as a teacher. And he didn't take that as like, I need to help this student more. He was like, I need to bully this kid into dropping out. That's kind of his attitude. So we worked out a thing where when there was a test, he would be sick that day. I would do the test. He would come back the next day. I would slip him the test because he would have to go and do it in the library. And because I was like, if anyone needed to be in school, it was him. And he got caught one day. And the teacher was like, I'm so sorry. Because I was his best student. I was really, good with numbers and whatever. And he was such a simpering jerk. Anyway, they sent the kid to the office. And so I ran to the office and I said, no, I gave him the test because he needs help. And they commended me for my honesty and they suspended him. And that was kind of it for me. I finished the year, but then I started grade 11 and I'd already turned 16. And I found out that when you were 16, you didn't need your parents' permission to drop out of school. So I was like, what? I've been 16 since April. And I went straight to the office and I dropped out. That was it. I was like, I'm just done. And the sad thing is, and in hindsight, this was a sad thing. They give you a paper. You have to take it to all of your classes and get your teachers to all sign off. I think in the hope that someone will talk you out of it. Not one of my teachers tried to talk me out of it. Not one. So I was like, okay, that's cool. And I was like, I'm obviously ready for the world. I'm off to have adventures. It was, yeah. Hindsight is 2020, right?
Yeah. But that's what you're saying about the disillusion thing. I do actually see this with a lot of kids who are problem kids, right? Children that have supposed learning problems. When you sit down and talk to them, they are brilliant at something. Not just good, they're brilliant at something. And there was one lad I was teaching guitar, and I just happened to mention something about bushcraft skills. Because obviously when I teach, I use a lot of sort of NLP stuff, and I'm pulling things in from all different possibilities of explaining stuff. And his ears pricked up. And he said, I do that. I said, do you? I said, what do you do? Oh, he said, light fires. Because immediately you think, okay, the guy's an arsonist. But no, he was trapping, he was setting traps for, rabbits and stuff like that, skinning them, cooking them. And I'm thinking, this kid hasn't got any problems with learning. I mean, this lad is incredible. He's sort of like a survivalist, And I thought, well, probably nobody knows this. Probably good job, actually. But he's not the first lad that I noticed that was what was going on, that they had strategies that just didn't sit with the education system, their ways of looking at things. And they would get disillusioned by how they were being taught in the classroom because it was just boring.
Yeah.
It's just boring. I'm not interested in that, right? It sounds like the sort of stuff that was going on for you.
Oh, yeah.
And also a lot of, and I had this as well, this feeling of injustice. When something is done to somebody else or to you, and then you think, that's it, I'm not doing it anymore, thank you very much. I'm not interested in your subject anymore. And, because in NLP they call it a polarity responder. So you respond by literally just flipping out and going the other way,
Equal and opposite reaction.
A polarity responder. And I think there's You know, a lot of very, very bright people have fallen into those categories, and of course, this is why you get a lot of kids. Their stories are, you know, they're very successful, but they weren't very good at school or whatever it is. You know, it's like, oh, shock horror. You know, they've become these incredibly successful people at whatever it is that they decided to turn their.
Well, and too, a lot of times in school, I mean, some of my teachers were very passionate, and those classes I did exceptionally well in. Some teachers obviously burned out, tired, they're overloaded, they're not paid enough. Like, as far as I'm concerned, teachers should definitely make as much as athletes because they're working so hard. And they have like the future of humanity being funneled through their classrooms. Like, why is there not, you know, more realization that teachers need more support? Like, I don't begrudge any of the teachers. At the time I did, but now, you know, with perspective, I don't begrudge any of the teachers who were burned out or tired or whatever, with not having all of the energy to support me and 30 other children in a classroom. But there is this kind of, what's that saying? The nail that sticks up gets the hammer. You know, the teachers who are innovative, who do recognize that not everyone learns the same way. Some people learn by reading, some people learn by writing. Some people need to do stuff, like get them out into the bush, skinning a rabbit, and they're, you know,
Exactly.
they're doing it. And like, I started working for my uncle when I was 29, I think. He's a mechanic. He fixes boats. I had never done an oil change in my life, like never done anything mechanical. We had these twin engines on some boat, some whatever. And he did the oil change on one, went through it, said everything that he was doing. And he's like, okay, now you do the other one. And I was like, okay. And he's like, I'll be back in half an hour. And he just left. He just left. And I was like, oh my God, I'm sitting there and I'm like, okay, well, I know he did this. Okay. And then he did that. And then he did, oh, okay, I should stop before I break something. I'm probably, this is a very expensive boat. I'm going to break something. I'm going to stop. I'll wait for him to get back. I'm like, oh, but if he gets back and I haven't done anything, I'll feel like an idiot. Okay. But then he did. And I did it. I just did it because someone believed that I could. I mean, showed me how, certainly that helps a lot. But that having that belief, having someone believe in you like that. And I think about like all the teachers I've had, not just in school, and the most effective ones were the ones who, you know, showed me, but then stepped back and let me work it out and believed that I could, like trusted me. Because that's huge, you know, when you're a kid, when you're a teenager, like, you know, I was a bit messy. And yeah, adults didn't trust us. And so we would prove that they were correct in that. You know, it's like, oh, you don't trust me? Okay, well, I will not do anything to subvert your expectations because it's that flip. It's a very specific flip.
So what happens between 16 and whatever it was, you said 20, 29?
29? Oh my God. Okay, so I dropped out of school and obviously I knew everything because I was 16.
Of course we do. Absolutely.
And I left home. My parents were amazing. And I left home and I went and lived on the streets. Partly because it was a really easy thing to do, to just kind of check out like that. Partly because I found a sense of community among misfits. We were like the island of misfit toys from that stop motion Rudolph show. where, you know, nobody wanted us, but we had each other. The hardest lesson I learned, I mean, I learned a lot of hard lessons because, wow, did I ever not know everything? The hardest lesson I learned was realizing that not everyone had the same kind of upbringing that I did. I already had a minor awareness of that because when I started school, I could read and some of my classmates couldn't. And that was just, it's like, what do you mean you can't read? Like, you just can't? You just don't, what? It was so that was, yeah, the first indication that not everybody grows up with the same everything. But I was on the streets because there was a freedom to it. There was I didn't have to be accountable. And that's very intoxicating to a 16-year-old who wants everyone to treat her like an adult. There's a funny dichotomy there where it's like, I want you to treat me like an adult, but at the same time, I don't want to really be super responsible in the sense that I'm a contributing member of society. Because that was the hardest part about being in high school, was that it felt as though they were funneling us into a reality where we would be, just a cog in a wheel. And I did not want to be a cog in a wheel. I wanted another option. But yeah, the hardest lesson I learned, sorry, I'm very tangential, one of those, was discovering that I never had to fight to get level. I already started at level. My parents were really compassionate, caring human beings who treated me very, very well and very respectfully in hindsight, considering what a little bastard I could be. Though not literal, they were married. But I was hanging out with a lot of kids who were there because they were running away from something, where I could be more described as running toward something. I was eager for my life to start, for my adventures, whereas they were trying to get away from just an insane amount of trauma. And yeah, watching kids, because that's what we were, watching kids struggle just to feel like they weren't sinking, like they weren't drowning in pain all the time. That was a bit of an eye-opener for me.
I just had somebody ring me while I was, and it interfered with the signal, so I missed a bit of what you said, but I'm hoping it recorded it. So
I didn't miss it. I just kept talking. I wasn't sure, so I just kept talking.
It might be okay. I don't know whether that might have glitched out. That's anything. So what I got was that you left. You got, you were on the streets and you met some other people. I didn't actually, because what I was going to ask you was, and you might have already said this, so sorry if you've already said it, but that decision of, and you must have known some of these characters, people that you met later. Okay? You must have had some association to think that's what you were going to do. It seems quite a wild jump into the unknown.
In hindsight, yeah, probably. At the time, I've never really planned well. I just kind of do. And some of the places I've ended up are amazing. Just like absolutely, yeah, flying by the seat of my pants kind of thing. Yeah, it was a time, like I think between 16 and say 18 or 19, I was on the streets full time. And again, credit to my mom, for trusting me to take the lessons I learned and not die. Like, I lost friends. There was people who didn't, but like I say, I already had kind of this foundation of love to build from and grow from, where there's a lot of people who really didn't have that and didn't have much of anything, and we're just it was day to day. You saw a lot of that. I just got to get through today. And so I was like fortunate in that. So that was a bit of a, and there was dark moments, and there's heavy moments for sure. You're a young person who puts themselves in a vulnerable situation. There's going to be stuff that's going to shape you to become the adult you are. But I kind of just ended up drifting away. I got on welfare and I got a place of my own, and then I found some work. I was a roadie. That was my first job.
Okay.
And then things just kind of, and then one night the lighting guy never showed up, and they said, "Hey, can you sit here and do these lights for a few hours?" And then I was a lighting tech.
Amazing.
Yeah, totally. And then someone said, "Hey, do you want to go live in Paris?" And I was like, "Sure." And so I went and lived in Paris for a while. I just bought a one-way ticket to Paris. I had $1,000. I was like, "Yeah, I'm gonna go win at Paris, everyone." I did not. But I lasted a few months, and then I came back, and then I started working for my uncle. And so by this point, I feel like I've had about 7 careers.
Yeah.
When I worked for my uncle for a while, fixing boats. I went from being a boat detailer to a boat mechanic. I learned electrical. I learned all kinds of stuff. I really enjoyed fixing things. I like the sense of closure that comes from working out what's wrong, working out what needs to be done, and doing it. It's more often than not, it's a really, really simple thing. And I wish the same principles could be applied to people. But, like if something's stuck in a pipe, you're like, "Oh, look," you shine your flashlight. "Oh, look, there's something stuck in a pipe." You can't do that with people. You can't be like, "Okay, well, what's wrong?" And where to start? Because that's the thing. Like, I have things in my brain that are like impedances, and I cannot for the life of me work out where I learned that thing, whatever that thing is. And odds are there isn't just one place.
No.
I mean, maybe you could be hypnotized and you could go back and, your great Aunt Matilda once told you that you had a terrible singing voice, and you totally compartmentalized it and forgotten it. And then there was all these things, and now you never sing. Maybe there's instances
that happens, but not that often. I mean, I've certainly experienced that with certain people that I've taught, that there was one particular thing that acts as a catalyst. But the thing is that before that, they probably were never encouraged to sing anyway. But it just happens to be the music teacher at school that was picking people for a choir, and they did something. But that wouldn't necessarily have happened if a child was already singing a lot, and being encouraged to sing in a particular way. And I think that's the thing, that we often focus on those little items, and sometimes they can be useful because they can act to shatter the problem. to disconnect the problem. But
Yeah.
I think a lot of things are, like you say, they're a lot more in the ecology of the thinking and the ecology of the person, you know, the ecosystem, if you like. But again, that's that sort of thing where we tend to, when we rationalize things down, we want to find the blockage in the pipe, don't we?
Yeah.
And
Sometimes it's just a matter of, like, you know, like how a tree gets hurt and it's got a knot and it just grows over the knot over. And so, yeah, you layer that. And if you were to dig out that knot, you would probably cause more harm to the tree. So I find I'm learning with my stuff. It's not a matter of like disengaging from my fears as much as learning how to work alongside them to, you know, divert the river if I have to, like, because smashing through is it might work, you know, it might be the thing to do, but sometimes the workaround is so much gentler and creates a stronger flow.
I think, you know, I mentioned earlier, language is metaphorical anyway. And that's a great metaphor you're saying.
Writer.
Yes, exactly. Yes, I know. We've got to get on to but again, we tend to go down the route of dealing with the knot, right? And which is what it is not, if you see what I mean. But the thing about a knot, we carry on with that metaphor. If you're chopping a piece of wood or you're cutting a piece of wood, a knot is the worst thing to hit.
Yeah.
Right? It's the toughest thing. So you can't really deal with that. You've got to go around it. You've got to make something of the knot. You know, if you're doing a bit of work or you're chopping a bit of wood or whatever, and you're faced with the knot, you've just got to go around it and think, okay, I can't make this a uniform log or whatever. It's going to have to be like this. What it's going to do. So you have to work with the stuff. So again, using that metaphor about people, you know, if it's something within yourself, you think, well, I'm going to have to work with this bit, aren't I? You know, this is part of it.
And that's the hardest thing, is like, because it's easy to accept the parts of yourself that are, you know, favorable or considered beneficial within whoever's perspective. But yeah, there's we all have qualities, and not just physical, but mental or emotional qualities about ourselves that might not seem as favorable or beneficial, but they're still us. Like, and that's the thing, like, people have asked me, if you could go back, would you change anything? I was like, okay, well, there's lots of good stuff and there's lots of bad stuff that's happened. Everything I'm the result of all of that. And who I am is, you know, a work in progress, this evolutionary. Oh my, yeah, I'm a writer. I'm good with words. Evolving. This ever evolving creation that is, like, for the most part, having a really good time with it. Even when I'm not, I'm having a fairly good time, because I mean, the odds that I should exist are so astronomical as to be impossible.
Yes.
And so the fact that I do is testament to my relevance. And the same goes for anyone. And yeah, you can, oh, we're made of stars, and that's literally true, which is awesome as well. All the things. So, I mean, yeah, walking, talking, thinking, drinking, you know, silly, good time, weirdness of it all. is just so worthwhile to me. So how could I not be having a good time?
Yeah, I totally agree. So your poems and your writings, then, come on, let's get on to some of this stuff. Because you set yourself some incredible challenges. So let's have a look at some of the processes that you do, because you come up with, you've got some great ideas. So your poems.
My poems, that's probably what I'm the most prolific at. I do a lot of, like, I have a blog on the internet where I talk about my feelings, and that I do a lot of rambly streams of consciousness, because that's the joy of being a writer, having that be my preferred medium. Is I have like the entirety of the English language and a little bit of the French and some of the others to explore and encounter myself. And that these, what do I call them? Rambly streams of consciousness, meandering streams of consciousness, whatever you want to call them. I'm on like this path of Satori, of self-discovery consistently. And I feel so fortunate in that, being able to access that. But yeah, poetry is, I don't know if poetry is the thing I do the most, because you can write like 7 words. You write the 7 words like this and it's a sentence. You write 7 words like this and it's a poem. And it's like, oh, that's very artistic.
Yes, it is a case of playing. It's like, I quite like this idea of just being able to change the format of something and it becomes an art form.
Totally, it's very cool. And I do like being pushed. I like having prompts. I make prompts for myself, because I once joined a writing group and they were doing prompts for us every day. And some of them I was kind of like, these are stupid. So there's that part of my brain was like, oh, you think you can do better? Yeah, I do. So I did. I do for me, I mean, some other people would probably read them and be like, these are stupid, So sometimes I use objects, like I use tarot cards, and I just pull a random card and then write whatever shows up for me, depending on that. Sometimes I did in October, I use 31 horror movies. I chose a line or a theme from 31 different horror movies and made them daily prompts, and then ended up writing a novella, because boyfriend was like, oh my God, these could be like chapter headings, and gave me the bones of this really cool story. And so we ended up kind of writing this, we made a book baby. We ended up writing this 30,000 word kind of novella, about some kids in the woods, as you do when it comes to horror movies. And it was really freeing, because poems are my thing. And to know that I had access to, enough words to fill a novella, first of all, but that I could do it, that I could push myself and do that. But poems are lovely because they're, a story is, here is the plot, and here are the people, and here are all the things, and it's laid out for you. It's like somebody taking your hand and guiding you along the path, where a poem is a snapshot that you get to interpret depending on your perspective or your life experience or anything like that. And there will be parts of a poem that will, I've read like a single line in a poem that just cut straight into my heart and pulled it out and showed it to me and forced me to examine some, like one freaking line. It was so good. I don't remember what that line was, but I'm sure it exists. I'm not making this up.
Actually, I came across a line like that. It wasn't in a poem, but it was in a book about storytelling, strangely enough. And I can't remember, he was quoting somebody else. And it was, the heart isn't heart-shaped. Because it is. And you sort of go, yeah.
Wow.
It's one of those sort of things where you...
More like a map
like,
of Tasmania.
yeah.
Oh.
So you're right. You get lines that jump out at you and of not just more than the sum total of the words. They're just ridiculously more than what the sentence is and what the sentence means and what the sentence could mean and what it doesn't mean and all the rest of it. It's far more than that. It just has a resonance that says something that you can't quite work out what it's telling you, but it is telling you something that you can sense. Yeah, I think that's the thing. And I mean, that's what good poetry does. But you were saying about these lines from horror movies being chapter headings. I mean, this is very similar to the sort of cut-up thing.
Oh, yeah.
That I use for...
I've never done cut-ups because I cannot bring myself to cut up books.
Yeah, but I don't actually cut them up.
I know.
You just, you sort of put your finger in, think, oh, that's the thing.
I guess you could just put pieces of paper.
Sort of bibliomancy in another form.
Yeah.
And again, once you start, that becomes a fabric, structure, chapter headings or whatever.
And it's cool because, yeah, like that, even just with that one line where you pull, even if it's just one thing, you pull it out but there's a connection. Now you're tethered, whoever wrote that line or wherever it came from. Now there's a connection between you and that person that you might have never known existed. And they might never know that you touched them in that way or that you reached them in that way. I always try to write to, like Lorna Crozier is a favorite poet of mine. And I made a point of writing to her and saying, I love your poetry so much, because to hear that is really, really astounding. And to have them, write back and is even better. But I think that's what's missing a lot of the time is as a writer or an artist or anything like that. Because once I've sent my words out into the world, they're still mine to a certain extent, but they're not anymore. They're just out there and I have no idea what they're doing. If they're hurting people, if they're helping people, either way, I'm not going to stop because I just can't. And it's funny because I never really thought of myself as a writer or an artist until I was probably in my late 30s. It was just what I did. And I thought of artist, I had a picture of an artist as something very specific. Like Patti Smith is an artist. Leonora Carrington is an artist. I was just this former street kid who just kept stumbling into cool stuff. And then one day, a friend, I was living in the Kootenays in the mountains in southeastern BC at this point, and somebody was on the arts council there, and they said, hey, we need people to apply for grants because we need to prove that there's people who need money to make art. If we don't have enough people applying for grants, they will take the money away and they will give it to someone else. And so a few of us in this very small town, like super tiny town, 300-person town that I lived in called Weimar, really awesome, magical place. I probably should not even say it on the internet because already too many people know about it. No, it's lovely. There's a festival there. It's great. And so a few of us applied for a grant. And I got a grant. I was like, I'm just going to write this book of poetry. And I got the grant. So now I have to write this book of poetry. And it's amazing how much it changed the frame that I existed in. Because I went from just being, a random chick who wrote poems about how sad she was or whatever, how was happening at the time, to being like a self-published, but whatever, published poet.
As good as anything.
Counts. It totally counts. And that's it. That's a funny thing too. That instant self-denigration, where even though I like went next level, like I published, I was like, oh, but I self-published. You know, and it's funny. That's one of those impedances that I was talking about. That's like a clog in the pipe. It's like, oh my God, dude, it's literally right here.
There it is.
There it is. It exists. It's a physical, tangible thing that I can hold in my hands. And actually, it has a funny thing in it that I was thinking about earlier, when we were talking about when I was 13. We were talking about like the arrogance of youth, thinking they know everything. When I was 13, I couldn't believe how uncool, unworldly, how ignorant about everything my parents were. By the time I was 18, I couldn't believe how much they had learned in 5 years.
Yes.
I have no idea where that came from, and that's the other thing about writing stuff and creating art and creating, like, it's coming from everywhere. Every book I've ever read, every movie I've ever seen, every song I've ever heard has filtered in and is transformed, transmogrified, transferred onto paper or spoken or whatever like that. But at the same time, it comes from nowhere, because the thing that I've written did not exist before I wrote it. And so there's like, it's freaking magic what's happening.
Well, it sort of is. That's the point about, you know, it's a bit of a complicated word, magic, isn't it? Because it has different meanings to different people. But really, when you look at anything that works in nature, it is sort of, well, it is magical, because you look at it and you go, that doesn't make sense how that happens. No, not on a logical level. Even like, you know, germination of seeds and all that. So we can explain the process, but it is just awesome. And how animals can hunt and how things can find other things. You know, it just is weird and incredible. And of course, we're sort of sitting in this extraordinary ocean of weirdness and stuff that's going on. And in the process of all of this stuff that you hear, and it goes into this somewhere in here, and it comes out extraordinarily beautiful in another story form. Because I often say to people when they're writing songs, you know, all these ideas have come from somewhere else. So point is, if you use a technique like we mentioned, cut up, but I use that term to do with anything where you just readjust ideas. And if you take a song by somebody else and restructure it, change the chords around, take a melody and turn it upside down, inside out, and back to front, you've created something new. And of course, people sort of go, yeah, but I really want to, you know, you can see them sort of fidgeting. I really want to write my own song. And you go,
it's kind of derivative, isn't it?
Yeah, it is your own song. Because nothing's original, and then it makes them very uncomfortable. I said, in all the years that I've taught, no one that I have taught has come up with a Mongolian cheap melody. You know what I mean? It's just, or, you know, an Albanian nose flute melody or whatever. I mean, I don't know if that exists, but you know what I mean? Because they've never heard it. That's why. So the point is, when you create something, it is to do with what you already are aware of. It's got to be in there somewhere for it to come out. And so that, you know, and I've seen a lot of people, I've taught a lot of people, nobody's done it. So you think, well, okay, so for the most part, you're reorganizing things that you've already heard. Or whether that's a story, whether it's a song, it's a melody, it doesn't matter. That's what you're doing. But the part is, you are part of the process. That's the important bit. You're part of the process. it's not yours necessarily. We might refer to it as ours,
Mhm.
but we're part of the process. And then we create the thing, and we have some sort of ownership in it because we've created it. But we also don't own it. And it's a difficult one for people to get, isn't it, that in that process?
Well, that's actually my biggest impedance when it comes to art, because I have this ability, gift, talent, whatever you want to call it. I struggle with all of those words because they suggest something grander than how I personally feel about it. Though it is grand and lovely. I'm gonna jazz hands all day long about how grand and lovely it is to create stuff. But there's this part of me, because I work, I fix things for a living. If we're going to come all the way back around, my job is that I go and I work at a hotel and I fix things, and it's great. It satisfies many parts of myself that enjoys that. And the best thing is it pays my rent, so it gives me room to create art. Because being creative when you're in a scarcity mindset, or physically, or when you're struggling to pay the rent, when you have to choose between food and bills, which is a place that I've been in many, many times, and knowing that that is considered, in a certain sense, failure when you exist within a capitalist paradigm. If you're struggling with money, that's a you problem. That's not a rising cost of housing, inflation, blah, blah, blah problem. That's you're failing at capitalism. But anyway, there is a part of me that feels I should be working as a writer, that I should be a working writer. That if I'm so good at this, why aren't I making money with it? And so I do. I have this really lovely creative period. Oh my gosh, it's so good. And then I hit this point where I'm like, I should work out how to commodify this. I should be focused on my author platform, on marketing things, on all the stuff. And it was a creative streak over, done. And then I have to crawl back just to get there. We're back to that getting level thing. I have to crawl back to a place where I'm enjoying the art again, because that's when it gets really good. And as soon as I'm enjoying it to a certain extent, it's like, hey, you know what? Oh, God. Again, come on. I have a decent job that covers the rent. Does it fulfill me in all the ways? No, but that's the system we exist within. Do I wish it was different? Heck yes. Smash the patriarchy all day long. That's as political as I'm going to get. But there is this push that if you're going to commodify art, or you're going to, earn a living from it, or whatever like that, that there needs to be a restriction to it. That the words which I have written stay mine, so that I can make money and whatever like that. And here's the thing, I am so supportive of artists making money. I try and give money, I'll go to all the little markets and I will try and buy something from every single person at that market, because I believe so much in people putting food on the table as a result of their art. And in fact, I was short on my rent one month, and I put out a call and I said, you know what, if 20 people buy this for whatever it was, I'll be able to pay my rent this month. And everyone came through. And it was a really uplifting feeling to have that sense of community to draw from, and to know that, you're supported as an artist. I'm not sure how it would work for me. I haven't, that's one of my impedances, is I have this weird, it comes from childhood somehow, where poor people have integrity and rich people are corrupt. So already from the get-go, my relationship for money is a really bad one.
Yeah.
And that illusion that what is it of the starving artist,
Yes.
you know, like you have to, like, I grew up with loving, caring parents who we weren't rich by any means. But I actually didn't know, my joke is that I didn't know we were poor until somebody came over. One of my friends came over and I said, "Oh, do you want butter on your toast?" And she said, "Oh, that's not butter, that's margarine. That means you're poor." And I was like, "What? We're poor? Oh my God, Mom." But there was always food on the table, you know, there was always laughter, there was always joy.
Yeah.
And so I didn't, I totally forgot what I was talking about. Yeah, the idea that, I didn't suffer. And I felt that to be an artist, you had to suffer for your art. So I think that I went out of my way to create suffering in my life so that I would have something interesting to talk about or write about. And in hindsight, it's obviously not logical or rational.
Yeah.
But you know, as a passionate young person, where for whom everything was black and white, justice versus injustice, yeah, it seemed, it's just what I did. I don't even know if I thought about it, but it's what I
don't
did.
think people do. I think it's only when you reflect back, you sort of think, well, that's something that I did. I don't know where that came from, and you can see that somebody who's a successful artist might be able to make sense of events in life. There's other people, if you became a successful accountant, maybe you don't sort of look at the things which were the rubbish parts of your life and say, I'm a great accountant because I suffered for my art.
And too, I guess it depends on like how that success is defined, because that's, I think, a lot of the trouble is that many times in my life, I didn't actually know what I wanted that life to look like. I was just kind of living it. And funnily enough, I think those were probably the most creative times, because I wasn't thinking about what was going to happen. I was just happening or whatever. But yeah, there's this sense of like say, look at someone, I've got all these comics up here, right? And some of the comic book writers are, and I always buy by writer. I don't buy by the character or the comic. Like, writers are my joy. So look at someone like anyone up here, and they're just a weirdo who's writing comics and writing weird stories and submitting them all over the place. And then they get elevated and they are now like a known name. They're in, weird people households all over the place. And TV shows are getting made from the stuff that they've created. And there's a contingency of their fan base that's going to be like, that's sellout.
Yes.
But
why aren't you suffering?
But he did the thing. He did like the thing that where you work and you work and you work and you sell and you elevate and you level up, and they've done it. It's possible that weirdos can, as long as they don't have these, impedances, or manage to find a way around them.
Yeah.
And the reality is, it doesn't matter what you do or what you don't do. There's always going to be someone somewhere who's going to be like, that's stupid. And
absolutely will. Totally.
So I think there's a part of me that is like, well, as long as I'm under the radar, I will probably never encounter that. As long as I only show my writing to like people who love me enough to lie to my face. See, there it is again. That self-deprecation. Oh, it's classic. Use it as a humor device.
But it is something that's quite common amongst people who are artists.
Well, I think it's because I mean, even growing up, even artists that we venerated, they still don't hold the same kind of place as like scientists or people with practical jobs. You know, when I was 40, I went back to school to be a heavy duty mechanic because I needed to do, I panicked. It was probably a midlife crisis or something. And I needed to do something practical. I'd have this weird, whimsical, barefoot, meandering existence that was working just fine for me as far as it goes. But something kicked in. I need to do something practical. And I went back to school to be a heavy duty mechanic because I like fixing things and may as well start at the top and work my way to boats or something. And I knew within 2 months that I'd made a terrible mistake, that I had no interest whatsoever in doing this, but I finished because sometimes following through just to prove that you can is more important than the thing that you're doing. And I have not worked as a mechanic since. I'm still writing.
A system. Using a mechanical metaphor.
Yeah. Well, that was actually how this, because it's called The Mechanics of Dreaming. That was how this showed up, because I'm in school and I'm at the back of the class and I'm scribbling, not notes. I'm like writing poetry at the back of the class. And there was this part of me that was so sad that idea that I'd branched off, that one of me had decided to become a full-time poet and the other had decided to do something practical with her life, put on some steel-toed boots rather than be barefoot. And I decided to be a mechanic. And then eventually I worked my way around that knot and decided, no, I can be both.
Yeah.
We're constant paradoxes. We're constant dichotomies.
Yes, we are.
Sometimes within the same sentence.
Yeah. I wandered lonely as a sun. No, I don't. Yeah. I wandered lonely as a gasket. So you've obviously got ways of people being able to buy your stuff.
Oh, I have a website. I've had it since like 2009. It's funny. It wasn't even, I think I just started it to keep track of where I was at the time. And so yeah, I've got books on there. I've got some, I'm gonna guess I probably got about 40 left physical. I did 2 print runs. That's very impressive.
That is very impressive.
Yeah, it was cool. I sold out of the first one. This is number 67, but I think, apparently this was earmarked for someone who never got it. I'm very organized. And the book that I wrote with boyfriend, it's called, what's it called? Tales from the Bus Meet Cafe, Volume 1, The Secret in the Sauce. It's, yeah.
Yes.
It was fun.
I like that one.
It's really fun to write. I'm working on the sequel at the moment. I think the original plan was only to do 1, but call it Volume 1, because whenever they make, they made Texas Chainsaw Massacre or Halloween without ever the intention of there being an umpteenth amount of sequels. So we're like, yeah, we'll call it Volume 1, and then there will never be another one. But it was so fun that we were like, no, we got it. And the characters who showed up, that's the most fun part, is that I'm never really sure what's going to show up. And more often than not, the stuff that does is like, it's really cool. It's really cool what shows up. I've got, a few different, I feel like it's time for another poetry book. It's been 5 years since I did a poetry book. And I've acquired some more. I've always got projects on the go. I'm always happy to, write whatever. If I usually do monthly prompts, and then I just put them out there. Like I'll post the picture of them on Instagram. So whoever, and people are like, oh, what is there like a hashtag? And I'm like, if you want, yeah, I'm not really good. Every so often that business side of myself is like, I should hire someone to help me learn how to author platform. Mostly I just write. I just put it on the internet, and if someone stumbles across it, that's amazing. I mean, if you want,
I'll put some stuff on the show notes. All right.
yeah,
And then, you can share the podcast, and then I'll share the show notes.
yeah. Tales from the Bus Meet Cafe is only digital. It's on Amazon and Smashwords. That was actually something that was really cool about that process too. So wrote this book, and formatted it. That was a nightmare. And then just published it on Amazon. And now it exists where it never existed before. And people can stumble across it and see it. And that was a really freeing experience to do that, because this was actually quite formal, and there was a grant application and everything had to fit within parameters. Whereas like, oh my gosh, I get it. I get why so many people are just churning out stuff on Amazon, because it's a lovely thing to do, and you never know who's going to come across it and have their day just that much brighter as a result.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, technology is not all bad, is it, really?
No, oh my gosh, there's so much good. I had my thumb pulled off in an accident, and dude spent 4 hours under a microscope reattaching my blood vessels so that I have because I play the piano. I can't quite reach an octave anymore, not like I used to.
Yeah, right. Okay, I got you.
But it's there. So I give technology 1.5 thumbs up.
Yeah. I think on that note, that's amazing little story. Brilliant. Anyway, it's great chatting, Trish.
Yeah.
And
I'm rambling at you.
No, this is what it's all about. I like a ramble.
Cool.
It's good. So yeah, it's great chatting. And
thanks for having me.
And I'll put my that's great. Awesome stuff. I'll speak soon.
Yeah.